So, Ante Bikic and Anne Cooper, welcome back to the Map It Forward podcast for part 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We had a great conversation last time, but we didn't get to properly nerd out on coffee roasting. And full disclosure for anyone who's listening, expecting that I'm going to contribute in any way to the nerding out of coffee roasting, that won't be happening. I'm here to learn, and we will leave the nerding out to the wonderful Anne Cooper and the Nordic. Well, you're the Danish national roasting champ.
That's
right?
correct. Yeah.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! And Ante is going to hopefully be competing if it goes ahead at the Worlds in Taiwan, if it goes ahead. So, what are some of the ideas that you guys want to chat about today?
I don't know, because I think we were sort of talking about, I think I was trying to think of what we left off, so sort of saying, we didn't really talk about some of the spicy stuff, the stuff that, the things that come up in the industry that might give us a little bit of a challenge in terms of, whether it be the way that we question ourselves or the information that we focus on, what do we believe or not believe, how do we, back ourselves, data versus, sensory, all that kind of stuff in terms of, all that, sort of like, the nitty gritty of, I guess, of what really makes up our roasting. What are we focusing on, not focusing on? And I think that, because I just sort of, made some sort of like quick notes before, jumping on. And I think it's always coming down to, we seem to have a really bad habit in the industry about either not feeling confident to back ourselves and kind of knowing what's right. And I think that was probably one of the things that I really loved about, meeting Ante, was that in that first meeting and seeing, him talk about the profiles he was working on for the competition, and the fact that he knew his profile as a flavor and was really clear about that connection. And I think that's what I really loved about meeting you, Ante, is then I was just like, oh my God, this is like everything that we want roasters to be like in terms of decisive, connected, and really, seeing the full circle loop between knowing your green, knowing your machine, and knowing your flavors. And I think that's kind of like where I'm at with that kind of like more of that nitty gritty kind of stuff.
Just to ask you both on that, in your experience with roasters, do you find that they're either obsessed with the numbers or obsessed with flavor rather than obsessed with both? Is that what we're saying here?
I think it changes. So if you're able to nail your numbers the way you want, then it's going to be about the numbers. If you're not able to do that, then it's going to be about the flavors. So
and I think that's where that back and forth might come, from, because sometimes I see if you're focusing on the flavors, which is great, but if you then don't back yourself up to show you how you created those flavors, then you can't replicate it and be consistent with those flavors. That's what I see a lot of anyway. And so it's really important in terms of data collection, collecting the right data. So then you've got that, with you. So when you're doing your tasting and evaluating, when you find something that you really love, how to then go back, to your data, and then exactly what created, that flavor, as well as everything else about how, what you did on the machine, the kind of green you were roasting, and then everything else that comes along with that. So I think, we all, I don't know about you, Ante, but you naturally go through phases of what you focus on, in terms of, you go through a phase where it's just all about numbers. You go through a phase where it's all about, like, I remember a time I was only roasting by exhaust temperature. We didn't even look at the bean temperature. Sounds really crazy, but it was just the design of roaster that I was on, and we only were really just fixated on the exhaust temp. And it was just, when I look back at it now, I just went, how on earth how did we do that? Like we knew to mark first crack, and we knew, the temperature, and then the kind of like development onwards. But yeah, it was really fascinating when I look back at that now. It's just like, wow. Yeah,
But
you go through.
on that note, the exhaust temperature is really important in, it gives you, like, you can see ahead.
Correct.
If the exhaust temperature rate of rise is, let's say, rising up, that means your bean temperature is going to do probably the same.
Yep.
And so it's important part, but it's not the way I look at the data is it's a first part of a quality control. So if my data is on point, then I know even if I don't copy it, I'm confident enough to pack it and sell it. There's not gonna be any issues with it.
Yes, and that's such an amazing point to make, because as you were saying that, the first thing that came to mind, and you may have done the same for yourself, in terms of, so I create for myself a chart of parameters for all of my different roast levels. So when I'm defining my difference between whether it be a sample roast, filter, single origin espresso, milk-based espresso, and sort of like different ranges. And even within my filter, I've got pour over versus drip, slight distinctions with those. I've definitely said that to roasters before. Yeah, you will get to a point where you'll nail your data points, and you won't feel the need to then, cup and taste it. You can confidently send it out to the customer, but you've done the due diligence beforehand to get to that point of defining those parameters. So I think that's a really important, point to make, in terms of only until you've gone through all of that, data collection, tasting, QC, connection, you can confidently get to that point. As you said, you're hitting all your data points, and you're smashing out your production, and that, out to your customers, the product's on point. Yeah.
First rookie question from Lee. Sorry, Ante. On exactly what you've just said. So if you're doing that, how do you stay on top of the quality of your green and how it's aging?
It's a sample roasting and then cupping, then seeing any changes, notes, and then I have actually one roast that I prepared to show the graph how it's like from
awesome.
August last year to now, how we increased the temperature and changed the batch size, and
oh, cool,
to compensate for a bit for age and stuff like that. But on that note, how you roast for a drip and a filter, we approach roasting here a bit differently. Mm-hmm. So when we are deciding on a blend or a single, there is idea what taste experience we want to deliver. Then we choose the green, we choose the roast, and then we more focus on changing the brewing method rather than the roast. So we don't have the same coffee that we roast multiple ways.
Ooh,
it's just how we with the machines and everything. What we want to do is it works better for us.
Yep.
So I'm a big fan of rather changing the brew method rather than changing the roast.
Interesting.
So do you match the brew method to specific coffees? So will you say that espresso is more matched to this coffee and drip is more matched to a different coffee?
Let's say we work with a big audience of people who are not interested in coffee. They just want to push a button in the morning and have something that tastes good.
Yep.
And then that's why we have like a lot of different coffees and blends and stuff.
Right.
When you talk about, let's say, something that we call Italian blend, something classical,
mm-hmm.
dark roast.
Darker roast.
We're always gonna recommend like 1 to 1.5 ratio. Mm-hmm. If you want something that's really powerful and intense with a lot of body, not so much of that bitterness and that tea-like body. Right. And that handles a lot of milk also in a nice way. Those are usually blends that people are gonna put milk and sugar in. So when you go with our solution, what we do here is you're gonna be asked a couple of questions. What do you like? How do you consume your coffee? Is it with milk, without milk? Because if you're having a lot of just the black coffees, then we have some lighter options.
So you're gonna match the coffee to the customer. Is that what you're saying? All right. Okay. Yep.
So we don't have this one coffee, then we roast it for a filter espresso and so on. It's just for a end user experience in a way. We approach it slightly differently.
My brain is imploding right now. I'm just like sitting here, just kind of going. I'm just like in my brain. I've got that.
You can see it dun.
if I could have that sound effect, because I'm just like,
where Lee sits back and watches
oh
it
my
all
God.
unfold.
No, this is fabulous, because I've just, the last couple of days I've been working with the roaster, a really good friend, and they're wanting to put together like a book of profiles. And my brain, it's probably because for the last 2 days my brain has been deep in profiles. And so the first thing that just comes to mind in terms of, oh my goodness, the difference between, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Ante, so filter through to espresso, are you saying the same roast potentially, and then you're just adjusting the brew ratios, obviously, and everything along with that to suit? So, but I need to also understand, and maybe the listeners too, and correct me if I'm wrong again, from a cultural palate perspective, you're dealing with maybe a slightly lighter preference in terms of like cultural palate preference.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yep.
Even our dark roast, what we call dark roast, is fairly light when you compare it to what you can find
What
in the
we would
market.
do. Yeah, yep. Because I know that for me, if I tried to put what I'm sort of, calling a filter roast through espresso here in Australia, it would just be like sucking lemons. It would just be really, really
super sour,
really quite intense and sour, and it just wouldn't blend or go very nicely with milk. From our palate perspective, because I just kind of had a flash of when I was in like Copenhagen many moons ago, having a cortado, and I'll just never forget how intensely like sour and thin and bright those flavors, but that was to my palate, in terms of my interpretation of how that was tasting. So this is really fascinating in terms of cultural palate, in terms of, and I actually did, and I got a text from another roaster friend today where they've had a client that was asking about the exact same kind of thing, like, can they just have the same like roast that they can use across filter and espresso? And I guess this, the first thing that comes to my mind is like, well, what do you want to compromise? What do you want to lose out on? Because that's my concern. And I guess I get a little bit stubborn, and because things that come to my mind is like being true to the producer and the effort that they put into the coffee. And so if we're roasting for convenience from our end and maybe not showcasing the coffee and the effort that the producers put in, like, how does that work as well, in terms of that, just to kind of like really, throw that thought process. It's not to make anybody feel bad out there that is doing that. It just does come to my mind in terms of convenience versus, our expectation from the producer and the coffee. And then we're just lumping it into kind of one little box and trying to make it work across different things. So just kind of throwing out that whole, things to consider and think about, and what we face every day as roasters, dealing with different clients and expectations, and then this is where the reality kicks in, the business side of it, like what you've got to deal with.
The biggest problem is dealing with acidity when you deal with a big audience.
Yep.
But then what we use as a singles, Brazil, Peru, and then the most acidic one is going to be Nicaragua. Sorry, not Nicaragua, the Guatemala.
Okay.
We also have some singles from Nicaragua and El Salvador. So all of those coffees are inherently lower on acidity a bit. And then how we roast it, then we don't want to express that acidity too much. We know that's the only thing that can cause issues. And then let's say, for instance, the other day we had a client wanted a single in a dark roast. We just suggested, then the espresso recipe was basically over extracting it.
Oh, okay.
I'm not gonna have our stock is, we have like a big range. Then, but we are in a unique position where we control also the brewing. So we can, if you like those harsher notes in your espresso, we can just over extract it. Use extremely fine grind and risk channeling and stuff like that. But it's the flavor compositions you're looking at that you want.
And just so that people understand where Ante is coming from, Ante works for Amokka and they have super automatic brewing machines. So just so that people can get a reference, if you haven't listened to the previous part 1 of this conversation, they get to control the brewing because of the machines that they're using. Everything's controlled through that. Sorry, go ahead. So do you want to show us that roast profile?
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I can start with this one, yeah.
And maybe even just again for maybe some people that missed the first session, just give a little bit of context about the roaster, the setup that you're using, probe types, all that kind of stuff.
So it's IMF hot air roaster, 60 kilo, 3 millimeter probes, down in the door, like deep in a pile of beans. It's we run it on a fully automatic cycle, so we don't change anything. Machine handles the recipes and the profiles, and then we just monitor how it behaves, and if it's needed, we may make some adjustments, which is quite rare. Only if let's say if we clean the fans, or we get the service of the burner, or we have a new lot of a coffee, then you have to pay attention to. Otherwise, it's consistent.
Yep.
So if you do the same things, nothing's gonna change. On that note, you're looking on the darkest that we roast. It's called Gorgona Italian blend. So first cut happens at 200 degrees, and then end temperature is 220, which is, I guess if I go like a degree or 2 higher, I'm gonna reach a second crack. I never really tried to push it that far. I was happy with how this tastes, so we left it there. How IMF handles when you load the green beans, it closes the butterfly valve, so there is no hot air coming in. And then we wait for 50 seconds, and then at this point we start introducing hot air. And then the machine tries to achieve your desired temperature, and then it's gonna keep that temperature until a certain set point. Let's say over here set point is at 95 degrees. It's gonna change to a second set point. And why we have these steps in the beginning, the reason is simple. Usually the rate of rise curves, they go like they peak, then they fall like really steep, and then they continue. And on a cupping table, when you compare it to this, where it's more gradual in the beginning, it doesn't have that big slope, it doesn't fall like from a cliff.
Yep.
In my personal opinion, is that they age better on a cupping table. They're gonna maintain structure and flavor better for a longer time. That's why we have this additional step, and then on this point we start to gradually decrease the temperature to have a controlled declining ROR.
Yep.
I would also like to point out that on a dark roast we focus more on a constantly declining rate of rise. I think on a dark roast, if you have changes in a direction of rate of rise, then you have they tend to get the taste harsh for me, and that's something that I don't like. That's on a dark roast. So I can still appreciate those dark flavors, but if it's like harsh or astringent, that's a big no for me.
So when you say change in direction, do you mean if you get like a slight gentle kick up?
If it goes down, then it falls, it's still alright. But then if it goes up, then I think it's a problem.
Okay.
And that's something that's quite easy for us here, at least, to taste.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily bad, because you have to think about it. The whole coffee industry for like a decades was built on that flavor composition of those rows that flicks. So, and those roasts are still happening out there, and people are still enjoying it. It's just knowing that fact that they exist and they can happen, and they're gonna produce this. So it's not necessarily bad. It's just something that we don't like necessarily.
Yep. And again, I guess that whole cultural palate thing, because this kind of makes me giggle, because this is kind of like one of my this is like a textbook milk-based espresso profile for me. What I'm seeing here. So
this mostly ends up in a milk drinks, yes.
Yeah. So I would say I'm definitely doing, and the only reason I say, and this is what I'm probably more connected to the phases in terms of the mapping out of the timing. But I know I've got a similar probe to yours. So your temps, the only thing that's different for me, my color change would be happening at 160, sometimes 165.
On that note, this is too soon for a color change, but I've on my first roaster color change was at 150, and then I always mark 150, and it doesn't really matter for us to hit the color change. We just want to reach 150 at a certain time frame.
Oh, of course. Yep. Okay. Yep. So that's
it's just another metric that we checkpoint. Exactly.
Cool. Yep. But are you pretty happy with that first crack check, that point at 200?
Yeah, it's a pre-roast blend, so it starts cracking before and then it lasts longer. So we just set up for like a mid-ground.
Yep. Yep. Actually, just really quickly on that point, I guess for those listening, so you said this is a pre-blend, this roast. Yeah.
Pre-component pre-blend.
Yep. So that's a really cool thing that you just said in terms of like dealing with all of the outliers and all the pre-pops. So I guess you're picking a point to deal with all of those like combination of beans in that, and then you know how long then, I guess based on the combination of origins being put together, in terms of that's kind of like a summary point, you know, for the crack, and then you know sort of like you said how long it's going to last for, and then you can kind of work your way from there. So yeah, pre-blending's an art form in itself. I think it's quite hard to do well, in terms of like bean selection, you know, getting nice uniformity in your roast color. But I think I love that point about, you know, dealing with the first crack and a pre-blend. That's really cool.
But if we pre-blend, then it's gonna be mostly on a medium to darker end.
Yep.
And then those coffees are gonna benefit for being a bit under extracted when you brew them.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have unevenness, then it's better to be on a lower TDS and a lower extraction. It's just they taste more pleasurable.
Yep.
So it's not an issue if you know how that coffee is gonna be brewed and for what purpose it is.
I was going to ask. Yep. I was just
going to quickly... Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
Just on one point on environment, temperature, rate of rise.
Yep.
We try to
My
keep
favorite topic.
Yeah, we try to keep it below 0 for like pretty much like a big part of the roast, only towards the end when we wanna. When your bean temperature falls below 2-3 degrees in 30 seconds, then it's hard to maintain the environment temperature on a positive value as well.
Yep.
But at this point, I'm starting to cool down my roasting environment.
Yep.
And this is, I think, I'm not sure, when my bean environment temperature falls below bean temperature, I'm pretty much just waiting for my time, and if people are familiar with the baking, I think this is what's happening here. When you kind of polish the edges off, maybe tone down some of the flavors, you just kind of make it round and flatter in a way, which is not a bad thing in the dark roasts, I think.
Yep.
You take the harshness away.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. This really, you know, I guess kind of clean looking decline on the rate of rise does give exactly that, a really clean flavor to those darker roasts. And you can get away then without, you know, not having any of those harsh notes in the back end. But I think just kind of like, you know, with the environment dropping the way it is, and I guess for those that have never used an IMF before in terms of dealing with the steps, it would just be a matter of like, you know, whatever your last couple of steps are in line with whatever temperature setting you've set the vortex to be, you know, kind of chasing. This to me is also a really good example of sailing out on built up convection energy. And you're really, you know, because you've worked hard at the beginning of the roast to get awesome energy in the environment and the exhaust. And so that's what I see at the back end there as well. It's a really good framing up of energy use on that back end. And that's why you can sail out the way you are, I think.
To be able to get this like gradual transition. This is the key step happens here at the beginning.
Yep.
So this is the point where usually your beer temperature rate of rise would start falling, and then it would fall maybe to 7-8 degrees and then continue, and then you have those flicks and dips in the end. But at that moment, if you increase the energy, then this happens. You have enough energy in the beans so they can carry the roast out. You're just helping with a burner towards the end.
And hence that whole importance on really riding your exhaust temperature and really understanding the really positive role that it plays, in your machines. Before you really flick over, just in terms of, if you feel comfortable talking about it, in terms of helping us, kind of connect with when you're planning a profile. And again, this is something that I really loved when we first met, and you showed us those 2 profiles in terms of the timing of the phases, kind of like mapping out where things are happening, and having an idea about, if you have a certain timing of an event, that you then know what kind of flavor that's going to give you, in the cup as well. So I guess, because to me, like I said, like this is a textbook milk-based espresso for me, because that's why I could connect with it so well, because I understand the timing on the phases there. Is that something that you consciously do, when you're dialing in a new coffee? Do you have like a repertoire of like, phase times along with, all of your other control points, in the profile?
So because I have these couple of these profiles saved on IMF, then like I said, we wanna deliver specific taste experience. Then we're gonna first we determine, is it gonna be like more classical, more modern, or we're gonna just focus on the green beans we have. And then I pick some profile from the database we have. Then it's gonna be green analysis, and then from there we're gonna take it in the terms how we wanna. But if it's a completely new coffee, we're always gonna pick first. It's gonna be green grading, sample roasting on Ikawa, and then we're gonna pick one of the profiles you already have. See how it behaves, and then make tweaks from there.
So essentially, and this is kind of like the way I like to work as well, in the sense of kind of what you're saying, you're picking a profile because you know the kind of flavors that profile gives. So essentially, and this is the beauty about, I guess, the automation on the IMF, because basically it's basically going to make that specific bean kind of roast in line, or map out, with the profile. We then, taste it, and then we kind of go, okay, well, maybe, this Costa Rican doesn't like being on that profile because it's not responding to the cooking strategy, of the, what you've got mapped out in the profile. So, and I think that whole thought process, with roasters, again, really needs to be reinforced, I think, a lot more in terms of, really being clear about the end result, the end flavor that their profile gives, and then what's the roadmap, what's the recipe, what's the cooking strategy, and then you test and go from there.
I would also have to point out that the difference between the reference and this in the foreground, we changed how we load our green beans.
Oh, okay.
So it was basically to optimize the production. So we shortened the time that we dropped coffee out from 30 seconds to 20. That means the roaster is going to be slightly on a higher temperature. But then we increased our soak time from 40 seconds to 50. So that's why over here the turning point and this first step is slightly different in the timing. No difference in taste, just we can do one roast more on a day. It comes down to that. That's something that we try to do, kind of to optimize it. So
So I guess kind of quickly on that point, when you sort of say there's no impact on the taste, how do we explain that?
So we do a triangle test where you have to pick the old one out, a regular cupping, and we make a couple of espressos on a machine. And so if two of us here in a roasty are not able to pick out the coffee out, then it's irrelevant.
Yep.
It's,
so I
it's,
guess.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I guess I was going to say, I guess when we are playing around with how we're introducing energy, at the beginning of the roast, would you say there's definitely a point where there's really we can really play with that first, whether it be, I think for me, 3 minutes is kind of the absolute cutoff. Like if I haven't got the roast sorted out by then I know I'm in trouble, depending on whatever's going on in terms of pace and all that kind of stuff. So I guess, I would sort of say, because we're in that momentum and preparation kind of phase, I guess, we can do a bit of experimenting without having, how do I say this? I guess too much of an impact on the flavor, depending on what we're doing in terms of like framing up for the rest of the roast. Does that make sense? I guess what I was just trying to ask is, like, if somebody asked you, if they heard you kind of say that, the way you said, oh, well, we've done this to the, the green bean, routine. We've brought this back a couple of, by 10 seconds, but then we've lengthened another part of it, but we didn't see any impact on the flavor. It would just be kind of like, oh, how would we explain that to somebody like learning roasting, and just helping them understand that first part of the roast, in terms of like, applying heat, momentum, preparation, all that kind of stuff.
So what I think is important in the first part of a roast, and that's, like you said, first 3 minutes, I generally aim for my peak rate of rise, which happens here at 2 minutes 20 seconds. Depends on a coffee, between 2 and 3 minutes.
Yep.
And the reason why, so it takes us around 17 to 20 seconds to load a batch of 60 kilo green beans into an IMF.
Yep.
It means that at 30 seconds nothing is happening.
Yep.
And then we have this step, and then additional step.
Yep.
I don't like to start my roast with excessive energy.
Mm-hmm.
I think they are easier to control towards the end, and they are gonna be more balanced on a cupping table if I start them slower.
Yeah, I did notice that, because at 3 minutes, I would say your temperature check point is easily, like, say 15 degrees. I'm generally at about 115 at 3 minutes on a 3 mil probe. So yeah, that's really fascinating for me to see. But that's also testament to the power on the IMF as well, in terms of how you can really manipulate the energy and frame it up the way you want to. And then, like what you're doing, you're really smashing up the heat to then help lift everything up so you can deal with the energy for the rest of the roast. That's really cool.
Should we go to a second roast?
Yes.
This one is a bit different. El Salvador.
Ooh.
So what you have on a graph here is a foreground is a 40 kilo recent roast, and then in the background you have a 50 kilo from last year. And this is, as you can see in the background, it flicks and then it flattens.
Yep.
It's and you can see even here how we changed how we approach roasting on the beginning. Previously it was a 30 seconds pause, now it's a 50. The reason for this curve and how it looks, this El Salvador was tricky, and on a cupping table, sweet, but low on acidity and really mellow, like tea-like, rounded, just enjoyable but very toned down coffee.
Yep.
And that's why we went for this, where we couldn't battle with this crash after crack, then we just lived with it in the end. Maybe it could have been better if we made it shorter, couple of seconds, but then when you have in mind how it's gonna be brewed, and it didn't work for espresso on our machines. It was hard to dial in and not really much happening in a cup. So we decided to let it flatten out for a degree more, just to have a easier experience with using it. So this is, again, it's not focusing on a curve and how it looks and then trying to fix it. It's just optimizing for end use.
And
That's
again,
why I chose this.
Yep. Do you attribute that again to in terms of how you're mapping out the cooking strategy as well? And kind of seeing, like, do you always kind of have in your mind, like, you always want to get to color change by 5 minutes ish? You always want to have a certain amount of time in the midsection, and then you always have a certain amount of time and degrees after first crack?
Yes.
Or a
So
total roast time and work backwards?
after first crack, I'm aiming for at least 1 minute.
Yep.
That's like a bare minimum.
Yep.
They can taste better at maybe a shorter development time, but then you're not gonna have that much fun using it on a machine, trying to dial it in. So
Yep.
the 1 minute is the minimum where it's easy to use, it's still delicious and stuff like that. It's
And do you also think in terms of in that last phase, like first crack to the end of the roast, in that minute, or what was this one? Was this a minute? I can't see the.
so the reference, the one in the
minute
back,
24.
the 50
Yep.
kilo is 2 minutes, and this is 124. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you also think in terms of time and degrees? So the end temperature on this, what was that?
I can show you here.
210.
210. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Then the reference in the back is, I think the end temperature is 207 when we started roasting it. And then as
Yep.
it aged, we just increased the temperature slightly. And
Yep.
on that note, when I have this like a sudden crash of rate of rise, that means lighter color, less development. Although it's a fairly 124 is a fairly long for these singles and 10 degrees higher.
Oh my God, that's like.
But it.
that's still short in That's awesome.
That's the beauty of an IMF or any of these hot air roasters.
Yep.
It's easier to get something that's developed in a shorter time frame,
Yes.
especially after first crack.
And I guess kind of what I was kind of getting at is terms of, I really, how do I say this, in terms of, I believe roasters should be thinking more in terms of time and degrees after first crack. So whether it be, 10 minutes in a minute 24 versus 10 degrees in a minute 24 versus potentially 7 degrees in a minute 24, because that's, two very different tasting coffees because of the different level of, heat being applied, which will of course give, also a different outside color, but also a different inside development as well. So I think it's really important to, always be really connected to your end temperature, but then break it down into, I use the term stretch degrees between first crack and the end of the roast. I try not to use the word development, because I think development is, the entire, reference to the roast. What do you think in terms of, how do you determine an end temperature? Is it, do you base it on the color first and then kind of work backwards to then assign an end goal temperature along with your QC tasting?
What we do when we roast in cava, we roast on a couple of different profiles. So like short and a low temperature to a short and a high temperature, and the other way around. So short and a long time, low temperature but long time, and
Yep.
high temperature, and then also the long time. And then we see what we prefer more, and that's how we determine it. And that's gonna, on that note, what we're aiming at is a specific rate of rise at the crack.
Yep. Excellent.
And then if we hit that, then we know we're gonna end up in something that's reasonable time-wise and temperature-wise towards the end. Maybe
Exactly.
it's gonna require. But if you look at a red line, so environment temperature, rate of rise, and then the bean temperature, this is the power of the IMF. It's just, I'm able to make my beans follow my environment temperature. So I'm just relying on the force of the burner.
Yep.
And that's why I love it with these smaller batches, and it's easy to control.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So I guess maybe one question, people might, kind of say is, bigger batch versus smaller batch, should they roast the same?
I cannot answer them to that question. That's you're dealing with the taste. So it's for me, it's first by what's most important is what's this coffee aiming at?
Yep.
Who is the end audience for this coffee? And then when I have a taste in mind, then I'm gonna make all the other decisions.
Interesting. So I guess remind me again, the profile in the background.
That's a 50 kilo.
50 kilo, and the one in
one
the
in the
foreground
is a 40 kilo.
40 kilo.
And
okay.
we can even compare with the reference. So the
40 kilo.
as you can see, it's 1,300 roasts in between these two.
Yeah, wow.
And does the same batch size elicit the same taste? Sorry, different batch sizes.
Different batch sizes.
Yeah.
So I guess because I guess I guess a bit of a conundrum question in the industry has always been, should different batch sizes roast the same? I guess in terms of, time, temperature, and the way that they map out. And I guess my brain goes down the track of, well, yeah, they kind of should, because the cooking strategy of green to brown is still the same, regardless on whether it's a, big batch size or small batch size. We're going to use different levels of energy to drive those different batch sizes to still make the coffee cook at the same rate.
But wouldn't the physics change in the system?
Yeah. So you'll be using different energy, different physics to make those different batch sizes still cook at the same rate.
So, for example, if you've got a room...
Sorry, I'm just completely
No, this is fascinating.
But it definitely... No, but have you heard that, Ante? Have you heard roasters ask that question? Am I supposed to, should different batch sizes, I guess that are decently different in size, should they roast the same in terms of time and, in general?
So the time we pretty much left the same when roasting it. What we did change is the temperature.
Yes.
And we changed it by quite a lot.
Yes.
Actually, but
you changed that, like you said, I think based on a flavor preference. Is that correct? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so
exactly.
So this probably is profiles are tasting close enough on a cupping table, or do they look vastly different? The color is 1 degree off.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
It's just this is a higher temperature, but a faster roast goes through the correct. So there's no big difference in the color, and the reason is as it aged. Unevenness in roast is usually on a cupping table described as complexity, and then the coffee, as it ages, as it loses a bit of its complexity, we do this fast transition through the crack towards the end to add a bit of complexity to it.
So
we made it uneven, so the span between the whole beans and the ground beans is now in a smaller batch, and aged green beans is higher on purpose to add a bit of complexity to it.
Cool, because that's right. So again, just to clarify for everybody listening in and watching, so the difference between these curves is also based on the age of the green.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Cool.
We normally, as the bean ages, we change the profiles, tweak them a bit.
Yep.
So it's gonna change, and the flavor composition is gonna change, and so we compensate a bit for that.
Right. Yep. So this is the same crop being roasted at different times, and so you adjust batch size. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You can see the dates here. Yeah.
Awesome.
And the reason why we switched from a 50 kilo to a 40 kilo is I think flavor clarity is better in smaller batches. It's easier to pick out the specific flavors and to discuss them if the batch is smaller. In a way it tastes more precise, if that makes sense. I think flavor separation is it's much easier to pick out on a cupping table.
So I guess in the summary, you found as the coffee is getting kind of older, you felt that you had to just adjust the batch size and then roast a bit faster, a bit hotter.
the batch size was changed because we preferred all of our coffees how they taste on a smaller batch size.
Yep.
But then we went slightly faster and on a higher end temperature, and the reason for that was because the coffee was starting to taste like flat.
Yep.
And then this it creates a bit of unevenness that's more interesting on a cupping table.
Yep. I can see that. Yeah. Understood.
That's why we went for like a 3 degrees higher and a slightly shorter roast.
Yep.
Development time on a smaller batch.
Yep. So I guess you're going to kill me for asking the same thing again in terms of when you say you adjust a profile because you think it tastes better, again, does your brain go to then, I guess, the cooking strategy in terms of you think it tastes better because it's hitting the events at a certain time, or I guess, how do you really define that decision of like lowering the batch size, making it taste better?
I guess after almost 2 years here, I'm and a couple of thousand batches. I'm just
just a few.
When I taste it, it's just experience. I can kind of say maybe it would be better if it had this first section before 150 degrees. If it's shorter for 30 seconds, it's gonna taste a bit cleaner. Then I test it out on one batch and then take it from there. It's pure experience, nothing else.
Yep.
Knowing the system and working with long enough with the same coffee that you build a kind of a muscle memory, and then you take it from there.
Yep.
And when you're saying it tastes better, what are you looking for and defining as better? Because I guess better is subjective. So you as the roaster,
so
what are you looking for?
If it has a more body, if it's cleaner, if it's sweeter, those are some easy metrics. So when we discuss these coffees, we never discuss specific flavor notes. It's never about the cranberries and apple and whatever it might taste of. It's something that we can.
Did you see ants jumping up and down for anyone who's just listening?
Those things are great, but they are such an abstract thing to discuss
and subjective.
Especially, we are selling coffee like all over the world from here in Denmark.
Yep.
So I focus on something that's measurable. We also tend to measure extractions on a cupping table. So if something is starts to showing higher numbers of extractions, we go for that. It means it's going to be also easier to extract on a machine. So it's finding some objective measures that you can follow.
Ante,
something that's easier to describe.
Been a barista?
For a big part of my career.
Okay, because when I speak to roasters, a lot of them talk about they don't need to know how to measure this kind of. Surely you've heard this shit, and this idea of I don't need to learn how to extract coffee. I don't have to understand TDS. I don't need to know any of this stuff. That's up to the baristas, and so that's why I asked that question. If you're measuring TDS on the cupping table,
then the same question you could ask is why are you tasting your coffee then?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Right.
Yep. And I think what you mentioned before about the profiles having more of those measurable aspects like body, sweetness, acidity, not necessarily the nuances of all the fluffy flavors and all that kind of stuff. Exactly what. Only reason I was so excited because that's exactly what this my roaster friend said to me today in particular, because we were cupping everything that we roasted yesterday, and we were because we'd really been manipulating and changing specific parts of the profile, and they said, I don't want to focus on flavor per se. I want to focus on giving these profiles really succinct descriptions in terms of this one's going to give me more acidity, this one's going to give me more body, this one's going to give me like we had this really fascinating profile where we did a really long midsection. So I think we did like 4.5 minutes, maybe a bit longer, but a really quick back end. So as a result, the acidity wasn't like peaky or tart, but it was like a stewed fruit, kind of flavor. So but we were able to really clarify that, you know, it was really cool. Yeah, so I really like that.
Rookie question number 2 from Miss Lee. If you're building a profile and you're creating these profiles that are saying, you know, this is where we're marking higher acidity and this is where we're looking for more sweetness, etc., etc., doesn't that need to be present in different degrees, in different origins, in different beans?
Oh, that did come up today on a couple of the profiles that we were working on. Definitely, we made a note about origin specific.
Okay, great.
So we were using
question.
No, definitely not. And we actually said, you know, this profile would probably suit a softer bean like a Brazil, and we would get this kind of result in terms of what it would do to the body and sweetness. But we did actually have a natural Brazil as part of one of their, you know, production profile roasts, and we had 2 different versions, and one had a really beautiful sweetness and there was really beautiful fruit, but then the other one was just all into that, you know, caramels, chocolate, you know, what we kind of want, what we kind of want a Brazil to do. Yeah, that kind of thing. But yeah, definitely origin specific, because we were using a Colombian for most of the experiments. And I think I can, you know, one thing, if I can really, you know, recommend roasters to do if you're feeling, you know, stuck with your profiles and your roasting, is give yourself an opportunity to do that experimenting and do profile manipulation in terms of the same coffee, and manipulate specific parts of the profile so you can give yourself an opportunity to taste and understand, you know, the impact, you know, on the end result in the cup. And the biggest thing we did, we kept the back end the same in terms of time and temperature, and we really played around with the front section and the middle section, and that in itself was just phenomenal in terms of the impact on mouthfeel and aftertaste, finish. Yeah, it was wonderful. So yeah,
I have a question for
very
both
good exercise.
on that. If you're not doing that as a coffee roaster at the beginning part of your career, if you're not manipulating different variables as you're learning how to roast, how do you get your head around what the consequence of shifting these things is going to be? It sounds like a fundamental element of learning how to be a roaster. What am I missing?
It is, but if you're starting to roast, and what happened to me, I own the roastery. That means starting business from scratch.
Right.
And then
so
learning by doing it, it's crazy expensive, and it's wasteful, and it's and that's the tricky part. To learn these things on your own, it's not that difficult if you have a system in mind, but it is crazy expensive and wasteful.
And I think, yeah, and that's the thing in terms of, I think there needs to be clearer guidance on what is roasting in terms of that profile manipulation, the cooking strategy, like the basics of decision points. The whole, like, it really is that running joke in the industry of turning beans brown, but it's how are we turning those beans brown? And it really is that green, you know, to yellow, to first crack, to the end, and just breaking it down into key sections. Understanding your machine, your specific probe, and the data points you're working with, and then you know, work backwards. You know, this is where you should only be burning through a few batches so you can learn your probe and understand what you're dealing with, so you can assign probe numbers to key events. And then once you know, your data point for yellow and your data point for first crack, then it's game on. You just start then learning how to drive your roaster and applying heat to get from point to point at the right time. And I guess that would have helped Ante, heaps, if just knowing that sort of like really simple, basic approach in terms of break your profile into 3 key phases, learn your probe, learn your data points, and then just learn how to drive your machine. And then off you go, as opposed to, it's heartbreaking when you hear roasters, or you see on the Roasters Forum people posting questions about their profiles and what to do, and they're not seeing the simplicity of that basic backbone structure of green to yellow to first crack to the end. and how to drive your way through. Because if you know where you want to be, that will teach you how to drive your roaster. And I think that's the key in terms of coming back to that. Roasters need to know how to taste. They need to understand the flavors that they want. Then they need to understand, and I guess that's where, as an industry, part of education should be this portfolio of profiles and the different approaches, the times, saying, okay, yellow at 5 minutes, midsection of 4 minutes, back end of 3 minutes will give you this flavor. Yellow at 5 minutes, midsection of 3.5 minutes, and an end time of 1 minute will give you this flavor. So you've at least got like a little, reference of
like
profiles. Like a reference of roadmaps to start with. You've then just got to then do your due diligence and learn your machine, learn your probe, and then you can just drive from point to point. And then, I guess as the saying goes, all the pennies start dropping in. And like Ante said, when you're on your own machine for a certain amount of time, you really get to know it and learn it and understand it. And that's where the experience then, starts to kind of like kick in. So,
I don't know, can you see this little bump over here on a faded orange line that goes up?
Yeah.
Yep.
This is a sign that I need to clean my fan.
Oh,
it usually starts to, my temperature going in has these weird bumps, and then I know I have to take my fan out, clean it, and then I'm good. So that's knowing your roaster.
Which fan is that on the IMF you're talking about?
The one that pulls the air through the drum and then through the cyclone, the vortex one.
The vortex, yeah.
And that's
I love that vortex. when that thing's like on point, it's just this kind of like you hear this kind of like it's kind of like the pin on an old UG roaster on the belt, and you hear the tick 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 of the pin going around on the belt. It's kind of the same thing on the vortex on the IMF. It's this kind of like reassuring sound of things going, well. And just the general performance on the machine.
How long had you been using the machine, Ante, before you realized that you could correlate that bump in that curve related to the fan?
Yeah.
It was a pure accident luck, because I've seen those bumps, and I've cleaned the probe, cleaned that butterfly valve, oiled it so it moves. I thought maybe it gets stuck, and nothing helped. And then it was just a regular maintenance. We cleaned all of the fans, put it back, and it was gone. And then the next time I appeared, I just specifically cleaned single fan, put it back, and it was gone.
Yep.
So it's
yeah, wow.
That's another valuable tip there for everyone. No doubt. If you do, I think in roasting, I would say it's probably one of the few professions where if you notice something change, do not hesitate. Like absolutely, respond to anything that changes, any, sounds, any different, movements or anything. Absolutely jump on it, because you know that something's about to happen for sure.
Why I brought this roast is also to see this change in the beginning that we made. Also, we thought that the coffee is it was more balanced before, and then when you lower this and then move our peak rate of rise for 30 seconds later, we thought that that's going to improve the balance, and that's why we made it. So those are the small tweaks that we do normally on how we handle production and capping. So all it did, now we're running this first section is at 400 degrees. Previously it was 430.
Yep.
And that moves our peak rate of rise for 30 seconds, and the result of it is improved balance on a capping table.
Yep. I guess in terms of better heat, because you can see at the end of the roast, you've got a much stronger rate of rise as well. So that in terms of end development's really helping in terms of whether it's helping get the heat through the structure of the bean a lot better, along with, your end temp. So 206 in a minute.
But if you look at it, it ended up being a 15 seconds shorter roast.
Yeah.
just because of this one over here.
Correct, because you don't. It's clearly showing you don't need to be in the roaster for as long because you've got the energy to get the same. You've got stronger energy to get you to the same kind of endpoint earlier. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a really good example as well to kind of, you know, remind us as roasters that whatever you do in the beginning of the roast has maximum impact on the end of the roast. And I would throw it out there, and dare I say, regardless, I think on all systems, you know, it's, if you don't set yourself up for success at the beginning of the roast, there's definitely a point where you can't fix it and, you know, and catch it. It's going to have a massive impact on the end of the roast. Yeah. Yeah, that's super, super cool.
Rookie question number 3 from Lee.
Yep.
When it comes to the beginning of the roast and what you just said, setting it up for success towards the end, what do you think is and this is for both of you, what do you think are the things that cause people not to want to do that in the first place? Because it sounds to me, as someone who's not a roaster, that if you know that you can contribute to a successful roast in the beginning of the roast, that you would just by default make sure that you do that. From the sounds of it, it's that people don't a lot of the time. So why don't people do that? And then the second part to that question is, how can you conspire to your own success as a roaster in the beginning?
Taste, 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 taste.
It's building that experience with tasting, and it's tasting other people's coffee, but not tasting it once and then saying this is good or this is bad.
Because I think as a roaster, we're basically putting our heart and our soul out there to be judged. And I think backing, and this comes back to that whole backing ourselves. We've got to back ourselves when we present a roast to be tasted. And so if you don't know what you want from your roast in terms of the end flavor, then you're not going to be strong enough to make those decisions about, you know, setting yourself up for success, knowing you're starting with the right amount of energy, you know, knowing your system, knowing your green, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is genuinely all driven by what do you want it to taste like. And so again, to me, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, there's a cooking strategy that then gives that end flavor. How do I do that particular cooking strategy, i.e. profile, on whatever machine I'm using? So then you've got the challenge of learning a machine, learning a green, and then defining your flavor, you know, with that profile. Mm-hmm. So then if you don't know your checkpoints, like you've got to have little checkpoints along the way. It's like how do I know I'm doing okay? Am I at the right temperature at the right time for this system, this probe, this batch size? Like there's a whole checklist that we're kind of doing in our head before every roast, that, as like Ante said, like you know, through experience and that muscle memory, we just kind of get to know. Like we're not just standing there leaning on the roaster, kind of like, you know, doing whatever. Like there's a lot of thinking going on.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. There genuinely is like a lot of calculating and a lot of thought, you know, with whatever we're staring at on the screen or thinking about in terms of have we framed it up correctly, and am I on track, kind of thing.
So when roasters don't set their roast up for success at the beginning of it, is it from a lack of experience, or is it because nobody has, they haven't been educated? Is it because there's no standards? What causes that?
Ooh.
I think it's because what we as an industry talk about is misleading. We're always talking about the length, temperatures, development time, and the beginning of the roast is rarely discussed.
Yep.
Oh.
And it's if you mess it up, it's gonna mess up the end as well.
Yep. And it does break my heart. Like there is, you know, some comments out there, things like, or maybe agree or disagree, Ante, in terms of like, you know, disregard the turning point. The beginning of the roast doesn't matter. All that kind of stuff. So again, it's very system specific and probe specific. And as I often say, okay, that's, whatever, say that, but it's a data point and it's a really good data point. So use it. So use it for consistency for your particular setup and system so that oh, okay, my turning point is either too high or too low from where I normally am. I can make a decision on, do I start chasing or do I need to pull back the heat because I'm going too fast or whatever. So I think it's having those momentum checkpoints along the way. And I think, again, based on either not being confident enough or lack of experience, definitely lack of education in terms of driving home those kind of practical, this is practical everyday roasting stuff that we're focusing on. And that's what I always try and make sure that new roasters get connected with is, giving them a very respectful dose of reality in terms of this is what roasting really is. You need to be able to make a decision because, a second is a lifetime in roasting.
Yeah, wow.
You can't hesitate. You can't pause. You can't go, oh, the beans are cracking. What do I do now? It's like, okay, right. What's my end point? What's my goal? Where am I headed? How am I going to get to my end point on time? All that kind of stuff. Or, yeah, so it's a massive series of decisions. And yeah.
On that note,
Sorry, Ante.
this is me trying to learn to roast on a geese, and
Yes.
Oh,
so I had a couple of ideas what I want to achieve with my roast. I want a profile that's gonna make something that's decent on a cupping table. Because at a best case scenario, I'm gonna roast like 3 batches of this coffee, and that meaning choosing one of those 3 batches based how my curve looks without tasting it. So ideally, I want to do roast just one and then submit it, and that's it, to minimize it. And like you said, this is a completely new system for me. The first thing was running a roaster empty and changing the airflow and seeing how fast does that make changes to a bean temperature or exhaust temperature, how it swings. If it's too fast, that means airflow is probably too high and it's gonna mislead me. It's gonna heat up the probe faster than the beans. And me not knowing the roaster, I've decided it's a 3 kilo batch in a 6 kilo roaster. That means still plenty of power from a burner, and then my decisions when to adjust the gas are based on environment temperature rate of rise. So the first increase is always after a minute. The second gas increase is when the bean temperature starts to fall. So this is increased, the temperature started falling. I always wait for 5 to seconds because it can rebound and it bounce back. Again, environment temperature falling, rising the temperature. And again here. And then it's pretty much same idea. But the other way around, when the environment temperature starts to rise, I lower the temperature. And slowly drive it towards the end. To my end. And on one note, I also wanted to achieve over here the fur crack is 190. I wanted my end temperature to be 198. That means the bean temperature at least 4 degrees at crack. Ideally slightly higher because you're going to lower the gas. That means you're extending your development time too long. And over here you can see I was at 4 minutes and then I have this flattening towards the end that I really didn't want to have, but I could have used here maybe a higher energy to get a better transition towards the end.
Correct.
And this is a roast from a book, me having an idea and then trying. But when you don't know the beans and stuff, you have to. This is why these probes and the Cropster is great. It's a live feedback.
And I love, because I'm all about the rate of rise on the exhaust as a way to help me with unfamiliar systems. So I'm a really big fan. I guess one thing I've never seen before, which is kind of cool, is your approach with ramping up the heat in the beginning. So then you were actually using the fall of the rate of rise exhaust as an indication to then go up on the heat. But then, of course, on the back end, it's when the exhaust goes up, you then go down on the heat. So I think that whole thought process was really cool in terms of helping you learn the system. So then when you do get a chance to, obviously this roast is with beans in the roaster. Yeah. So in terms of then, getting a feel for, just general energy, general movement. One thing I've learned on the Gießen is I find that the probe feedback is always a little bit weird because of the placement of the probes, and I don't let that stress me out, especially the exhaust. I find it gets
It's very dependent on the airflow. So I've settled for 100 psi. I think. Let me check over here.
Okay. Yeah.
I've made some tests with the 150. Yeah, this is test with 150.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
on a cupping table, it's not that clean, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
But then I've ended up using only 100. It's just it's easier.
I think so. 110 is probably kind of my go-to. And drum speed, what did you have that set to?
What's by default? I've never changed it, so it's 50.
Should be. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. That's probably the highest I would go. Yeah.
And then this is one approach, and then the second was this one. Because again, I don't know the coffee, and it's although I've roasted now on a Gießen, I've never roasted on that specific Gießen with that specific exhaust system, and I don't know how it's gonna handle.
Yep.
This is a single gas setting, pretty much.
Yeah. Wow. Especially too, I guess in the comp, when you are considering roasting a pre-blend as well, you've kind of got that, in the mix. And again, I guess, pretty crazy. And this is, I think we've chatted before about, in terms of industry perception, like with the look of the rate of rise curve, like how best would you describe what's going on with the energy with this particular, profile approach? And I guess what's the end result in the cup? Because this is what I really loved about your two approaches.
When you cup these two on a cupping bowl, this one is gonna show higher TDS, the single gas setting. Always. That's reasonably same color, let's say. And these two rows that you can see are the same length. Hold on, how do I now go there? So as you can see here, this is 10 minutes, this is 10 minutes and 3 seconds. Development time is almost doubled.
Yep.
Yeah, I overshoot here. But the single gas setting is always going to produce more balanced cup, and maybe sweetness on average is going to be higher, but it's still debatable. But more balanced, which is not necessarily something you want if the coffee is not complex by itself.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so if I have something that's extremely high quality and has plenty of complexity, interesting stuff, then it's going to be a single gas setting to hit my metrics, and that's it. If I think it's not that interesting, then I'm going to take this approach with a slowly ramping up and then gradually decreasing the temperature. On that note, what I think it's happening in a roast, it's like what I mentioned before. When people talk about complexity of a coffee, either it's inherited with the green beans or it's unevenness in a roast.
Yep.
So it's you can kind of maybe fake it, but it is some of the roast defects in it if you want to be strictly technical. So it's a tough decision because you never know who is going to judge it and
correct. Yes.
How skillful they are. How many of those defects are you going to showcase? Are they going to be like easy to detect, or they're going to be really hard and toned down? So it's
what are you going to do in terms of so in the competition you've got to do a sample roast.
Yep.
How are you going to do the connection between the sample roast and then your production roast in terms of, will you try and replicate this approach?
I'm gonna get my hands on a stronghold, and I'm gonna roast a specific profile that I can match to a specific coffee on a Gießen.
Yep.
And then I'm gonna, when I do a roast over there, I'm gonna also measure color, and then I have that connection that's gonna give me like a good idea where I'm gonna be.
Yep.
So for a specific roast, same approach, always the same test roast on a stronghold, and the same approach over here. I should still have same difference technically, or close enough.
Yep.
And then but it's mostly down to that's why I use the kava. Roasted a bunch of samples in a weird temperatures and then building a muscle memory, grinding them, measuring them, and then just looking at them.
Yeah.
Kind of so if it's on some days I can get it like straight away. Some days it's depends how focused I am, I guess. But the rose color is tricky, especially if you get some It depends on so many things and grind size when it's grinded, the calibration of the equipment, the state of the green beans, so many things.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
It's like you never know how off are you gonna be.
Yep. Yep.
You're guessing.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
basically a guessing game.
Rookie question number 4 from Lee about your competition. I'm keeping score, obviously. And this will sound like a rookie question, so forgive me. When you're cupping in another country, do you get to choose the water that you use for the cupping? Or do they choose the water? And can you have any control over that?
STA has that standardized how many ppms water has to be, and
that's right.
So it's just standardized. But it's I think on all of those comps you have that. I think is it Everpure? They have those stations to refill water, so it's quite standardized. And it's something I've tried to match here in a roastery with in regards of how many ppms it has.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they would have some sort of RO system set up as well to make sure it's all been designed properly. Yeah. Yep.
And will you use something similar to calibrate your palate to that water from where you're at, at home?
I'm just aiming for the same ppm, but the mineral composition is going to be different, so there's going to be some difference in taste, but I'm not that much worried about it.
Okay.
It's the same for me as it's going to be for everybody else, so it's I've tried cupping it with a slightly lower ppm, higher, and adding magnesium and third wave water and stuff, just to get a broader picture of what you can find there. Because water is tricky, but as long as it's soft, clean, you should be okay.
Okay.
It's not gonna. You should make some concrete conclusions and maybe make your decisions on it.
Has it ever come up? Do people talk about the water in cupping at roasting competitions?
Probably they do, but it's
showing my rookiness.
No, it would definitely. I'm sure it's been mentioned before, for sure. I'm just trying to think of what we did here, because I ran the first couple of 2 competitions here, the first 2 roasting comps here, and I'm pretty sure we just used. For some reason, I think the bottles at Officeworks had the right ppm on the water, and so. Yeah, we were definitely using bottled water, that's for sure. I know that for sure. I don't think we were using an RO system from memory. I don't remember any of the competitors. They may have asked, but I know that they would have also seen the same water being used for like brewers and barista.
Okay.
And we were also using the same bottles that they were using. So whether there was just like they're using the same water as the other comps, then it's all in line kind of thing. Yep.
But obviously mineral composition makes a difference in how it's going to taste.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, definitely.
It does, but then on the other hand, if you have too high acidity, it's the same approach in the roast to compensate for that water specific. So it's still same conclusions, just maybe it's not gonna. It's same for everyone, so it's fine.
So that's it. So as long as everyone's using the same water,
exactly.
As long as that's a variable that's not changing.
And that's the water that judges are gonna be calibrated to. You're gonna use it for a cupping. They're gonna use it for a cupping. So it's.
Yep.
Right. Is it something that you guys have any say in as competitors? Are there very many things that you as competitors get any say in when it comes to the Worlds?
Not that I can think of. I mean, the rules are the same for everyone, and then when you handle the green beans, it's up to you how you want to blend it, roast it, approach it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to roast one batch 3, or do you want to...
Yeah, I think it's pretty much as long as you follow the rules, as long as you read the rules and follow the rules. That's, I think, the main premise of the comps, I guess. And then you're judged and measured accordingly to the judging format to determine, I guess the ultimate winner. Because I guess because one of the points I wrote down before this as well, maybe sort of like Ante can see what he thinks, but I kind of made a point about how to judge the best roaster. Like what is the ultimate roasting competition format that us as roasters would feel really like, yes, I won that, and I know I won that on, full merit in terms of, whether it be flavor, or I guess the other thing I thought was in terms of, would you rather be judged by your peers or by, I guess, the general consumer or public? Like, what would you rather win?
I like this.
I don't know. I was just thinking about all these different scenarios, because I really love, for example, the Nordic Roasters Forum in terms of.
I think that's the best roasting competition as well.
Tell me what that is. I don't know what that is.
Oh, Ante, go.
Yeah, you have to be from Scandinavia, and then you have they all got to roast the same coffee that's supplied, and then it's there is a theme of every year. The last competition, it was, I think, hybrids or rust resistant varieties.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to source it, you have to roast it, and then you submit it, and then all of the people competing are judging each other. And
do you have to get accepted to compete? Or is it just first in best dressed?
I think it's the first ones who apply. It's like a limited number of seats.
Okay. Yep. That's
I've never read it fully, but I guess they have some spots like reserved for previous winners and stuff like that.
Maybe. Yeah.
So, but I think it's more fair when you look at this. Basically, what I've mentioned in the first part is you're roasting for a score sheet. What we consider as a roasting defects is a coffee that's widely accepted with the people and enjoyed on a daily basis more than what we appreciate as an industry. So it's hard. You have to have some metrics, but it's such a subjective thing that it's hard to be objective. What is the best roast?
That's such a massive question.
I know, it is, isn't it? It's like, what? Because I was just thinking, what would be the ultimate roasting competition? Yeah.
Anne and I have talked about it. And the reason this is really interesting right now is tomorrow we have the Sydney Coffee Town Hall for this month, for May. And our question is, do coffee competitions help or hurt the industry?
They do both of those things.
Exactly. And so we're going to have a group discussion about that. How does it help and how does it hurt? So I guess I want to put it to both of you. I mean, I hadn't intended on asking this question here, but now that we're there, how does coffee roasting competitions help and hurt the industry?
I don't think it hurts in a way as a barista does, because what happens on roasting competitions, you're not going to see like a roasteries around the world being copied and done. If that makes sense. What happens in the barista championship, that's going to be moved to the cafes and the bars. People are going to try to replicate it and stuff like that.
Which when you talk about like roasting competition, are you talking about the SCA format?
Yep.
Or are you talking about other competitions where you submit your roast to get judged by a room full of uncalibrated people and then
what are you really saying, Anne?
There might be
read between the lines, everyone who's listening. Ante, do you want to stop sharing your screen for a second?
Yeah. So Ante SCA, because I think I mean, I initially thought that was, the SCA format was awesome because you're put in a position where you have to learn. Well, technically, you should be learning a new machine, even though we get a chance to try and practice ahead of time. But essentially, I guess the challenge of learning new green and going through that process of, analyzing it, understanding it, seeing what you can and can't get from it, all that kind of stuff. So, and all those tasks. But then I guess the negative, as we kind of touched on, is that it's a points game. And I think it's I think that might be the potential negative in the comps, is that points chasing factor. And I think in roasting, the negative is that you're not ultimately judged on the best flavor. It's just who has the most points. And so how do we, kind of get around that? And I guess that's where things like Nordic Roasters Forum is just, it's 100% pure taste and flavor. Like there's just no ifs or buts about it, in terms of, how it's judged. So yeah.
And I guess like roasting is the end point of a structure that involves so many things that are involved in roasting. So sourcing coffee and storage of coffee and warehouse management and roasting and equipment maintenance and all of these kinds of things are what determine a great roaster or the quality of roaster I guess. So if you're measuring that on one variable, like on one final point, which is taste,
which is the most subjective thing,
right? Like, is that the part of it that's hurting the industry? Is what we're saying that?
But I think, but also too, is it the peers versus consumer as well? Like, who's the better judge?
Well, obviously the judges who are not calibrated and who don't really have that much experience in judging, they're the perfect judge, because clearly we seem to be getting that situation more often than not.
And I guess it's hard because I often see with those other competitions where you've got companies that are trading quite well, like really, really well. They're well-established, roasters. They submit their coffee into these competitions and they get absolutely annihilated, because they're either being put up against a scale that's not appropriate for their product, or it's being forced to be. And this is where this will, with Ante talking about brewing, like it's basically, does your coffee perform on the brew ratio that's presented for that competition? So if you're passionate about dark roasting and you're submitting it and it doesn't suit the brew ratio, of course it's going to get ripped apart, and not taste good, and it's going to get judged, accordingly. But meanwhile, this business is performing extremely well because the consumer market is just lapping it up and loving it. But then the peers are ripping it apart because it's not being extracted properly. And so definitely those competitions, roasters should have the ability to submit their brew ratio and have their coffee extracted as intended, and then judged, based on the flavor of that brew ratio. So if they're roasting a specific way and we're saying, so many grams in X amount of, liquid brew out in a certain amount of time, then that's how it should be judged, not being pigeonholed into this one brew ratio that is only going to suit one specific type of profile, and roast level. That's my soapbox, I don't know what you think. It's
a complicated topic. If you look at the Nordic Roaster Forum, which I think is the best format of the competition, but it's built for the industry. Industry is competing and it's judging itself.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's like a closed loop.
It is.
And then if you have a panel of uncalibrated judges or even not professional ones, what's the scale? Is it good or not?
Right.
Or what? Because you cannot have like a 100-point scoring system on some and then have someone who's not educated in using it doing that.
Right.
That's not going to work.
I was being very sarcastic before when I said what I said. Just for anyone who's listening, thinking, was Lee being serious? I was being sarcastic. Just for a heads up for anyone who's wondering. Go ahead.
What we do here when we have clients or potential clients or someone who just wants to learn more about coffees and if he's not interested into coffee, it's a smiley face, sad and happy, and a line. How happy are you with this cup? And then we take a ruler and we measure it to have just some idea, because it's a single metric.
Yeah. But funny enough, it works because it's something that a customer can, someone who's going to have to serve it is going to be able to relate to. But even that, when you think about it, even that is subjective, because what does their smiley face indicate and what does their sad face indicate? I mean, it's so difficult, right, to figure out what good really means for someone and their perspective of good and what bad means for their perspective. Because your perspective of bad is going to be somebody else's perspective of extraordinary.
Yep.
Which is so fascinating, because that's what makes, there's no right or wrong.
It's the art of roasting.
It's the whole preference.
Yeah.
This, the whole, whether it is, cultural palate preference, regional, all that kind of stuff. That's what's driving all these different approaches.
So when
it's kind of like, how do we say what's the best, or who's the best, or it's like
I've been fascinated
goodness.
by this in competition since the beginning of my career, because what is competition trying to aim for? No matter which of the competitions you look at, whether you look at roasting, baristas, brewers, whatever, are they trying to emulate what happens in the workplace? Are they trying to emulate what businesses are striving for as, a production roaster is the best production roaster? Are they trying to aim at the best quality flavor, and who the fuck decides that? If we just look at roasting, with these competitions, do they have an intended, this is what this competition is aiming for? Like to determine who can roast, I don't know, the most accurate roasts 3 times in a row, or like what are they looking at determining with roasting competition?
This is in the rule book. You should know this.
I think it's
in the beginning section of like, whoever is the winner is the champion of representing blah blah blah.
It has to be like the ambassador of it has to showcase the industry. You have to be someone that people are going to be aspire to be like. You have to be a role model, pretty much.
Right, but what I mean is, like, what are we when we do a competition? What are we looking at determining? Because it can't just be who's the best roaster. Go ahead, Ante.
Especially if you look at a barista, those competitions are mostly driving the positive changes. Some bad stuff, but that's mostly because people don't understand what they do and the implications of those, and they just want to do something that's popular. But mostly they drive the industry forward. And then when the specialty coffee is going forward, then the commodity is going to follow. So they're setting a standard in a way that's probably not achievable in 99.9% of the cases, but then those 0.1, then you end up people paying attention how they handle the cup,
right?
How they clean the grinders, do they freeze the coffee or not, and stuff like that.
So I guess, is the conundrum, Lee, potentially like competition versus reality, like the whole,
I think so.
Like what are we actually doing in our day to day, versus is there a little bit of like a how do I say? I was going to say, I don't know, like a are the competitions a little bit kind of they're not a true representation of what we're doing every day.
Because like I was talking with somebody in preparation for the discussion at the town hall tomorrow. Now, if you want to be a barista and head to the Worlds, you need access to about $100,000 worth of funding to make that happen, so that you can pay for the best quality coffees and equipment and grinders and et cetera, right? Flights, hotels, everything.
Yeah. Yep.
You need a team. It's not about one person. You need a team of a couple of people.
Right? plus $100,000 worth. You need people who can source all the coffee, etc., etc. Now, that isn't a fair representation of what everybody has access to. So it's not about skill. It's not about capability. There are a lot of variables that play into whether you have a shot at success or not. And a lot of those things are outside of you as a barista with skill. Go ahead, Ante. What were you going to say?
On that note, I've judged the barista in Ireland 3-4 years ago. I don't remember it exactly. And usually people who make the least mistakes win. So it's the funny enough. Green coffee and roast is important. It's important to have a high quality coffee.
Right.
But if you mess up your flavor notes, you're better off by grabbing something from a supermarket shelf and then nailing the description.
Really?
Yep. Yeah. That's a fair point.
I've over exaggerated, but
because all you're doing in calibration. So once you judge the competitor and you go back to have the chat, it really is about cross-checking your notes versus what they told you. And so it's the head judge's role to make as many notes as possible. So then we're making sure that we got everything and that it's matching. And then is what we tasted also matching what they told us to look for, all that kind of stuff.
I mean, you start with a full score sheet and then I'm just taking your points for mistakes you made.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much.
And do all judges approach it that way, or is that just how you approached it?
I haven't been on a calibration in a long time, so I don't know. Okay. But that's how we basically
probably one of the easiest ways to work through the sheet is just see what you tick off what hit the mark, and then obviously you start then seeing where does it line up and
yeah. So see how there's a disparity there in the barista comps. How was it different in roasting comps? Because it sounds like that you have more access to success in roasters comps and it's a little bit more approachable, or am I saying that incorrectly?
It's more approachable for sure, but then I think it's more subjective and there is more luck playing a role in roasters than a barista.
And having been having run two national roasting comps and being in the back end of it, oh my God, it's incredibly complex to run. It's a 4-day competition and the scoring, I don't know if you've noticed there's been a few big oopsies made at the world level on the scoring of the roasting comps. And I understand why, because the spreadsheet that we use for inputting everyone's scores, it's add section A to section C and then divide it by section B and then minus section F and then times it by 100. And I'm just like, what the freaking hell? We can do it. We did it easier, dare I say, manually, and it was perfect. It was 100% every time. But the rules stipulated by WCE, we had to put it into the spreadsheet. And I'm just going, it's not going to work. It is not going to work. And it didn't.
And it was stuffed up formulas, didn't they? Wasn't that what the
terrifying? Yeah. And
usually you have a team of people just for score sheets.
Score sheets,
yeah, exactly. People can do score sheets.
But see, that's the thing. And that's the thing I would say, dare I say, can be a negative of the competitions is people like myself. I'm giving up 4 days of my working life. I'm not being paid. The gratification and thanks back is not always there. The respect is always not given, and you dedicate a lot of time and energy because we're super passionate. I was super passionate about making sure that the competition went really well, and then at the end of it, you kind of it's like, thanks very much, see you later, and it's like, okay, very good. But because you really believe, in the platform and, what the roasters are, because you understand, exactly what they're thinking and going through while they're going through all the different tasks. So I would say negative is definitely in terms of, the people putting in the time and effort to volunteer their time and help make the competitions a success and run smoothly.
The lack of gratitude there.
That can be, 100% something that, if it doesn't, if you don't get the right people, then, it's not going to run well, for sure.
That's been
So,
a long time thing, right? Go ahead, Ante.
so now I'm competing. I used
Mm.
to judge, and a couple of times I was either stage assistant manager or a stage manager.
Yep.
So running with a timesheet and dragging the competitors around and making sure volunteers know what to
Mm-hmm.
do. And I think the judging is the most stressful part of it.
Yeah,
Really?
Much
definitely.
rather compete than judge other people competing.
Yep. Yep.
Do you
It's
feel the gravitas of the responsibility to get it right?
ju- I think it's just
I mean, if you're,
what if I didn't hear something? What if I
yeah,
put it
exactly. Yep.
down wrong? It's a million different things.
Exactly. And like, and you're sitting there and you see the effort they've put into their table setting and everything that they've done. And yeah, if you miss something, you can't go, sorry, like, can you do that again? Or you might look at the head judge as if to say, like, crap. And you just hope that they've also written down, all their notes as well properly. Even holy hell, head judge, their role is insane. The amount of like cross-checking they need to do, like, definitely things like they're keeping track of what cup goes to what judge, and then making sure that then they know what cup got extracted on what group head, all that kind of stuff. There's that whole connection. Like, they have to keep track of all of that. So if you've got a barista that's like, wants to deliver a truckload of information in a short amount of time, it's pretty crazy. I think the only kind of like, part of judging with the roasting is like obviously the cupping and the tasting, and really making sure that you've got people on point, and that know how to use the score sheet well, and appropriately, and they know how to move through, because there's a lot of samples to taste generally.
But then let's say you're a head judge and you're doing calibration on a morning of a competition,
Yep.
and you say this is overdeveloped roast defect, and I just fall out of the perfect window.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's a very subjective game.
Oh, this is the part
But
that concerns me about it, is that because it's so subjective, who gets to decide the point of perfection? And I guess it's the head judge, right?
Yeah, and I guess also too, it's like, I guess that's the role of the score sheet, ideally, to try and help keep things in check. But like you said, like, what's a 7 versus an 8, or an 8.25 or a 7.25? Like, you've really got to make that clear. You've got to set that expectation so that they know how to then, judge that as they move through. And as Ante said, yeah, God help you if the head judge calibrates the judges with a specific, this is an example of overdeveloped, this is an example of underdeveloped, all that kind of stuff. And you've tried to read the crowd as best as possible and roast accordingly. And you've just picked the wrong roast level to work with. That's the trick. Yeah.
That's the good and the bad part about it. It
Yeah.
challenges you in a at least me, in a ways that I've never thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
The things I'm thinking about now and how I'm gonna handle that is just on a completely different level.
Yep.
Which in the end, I think I am a better roaster because of that.
Why?
Because of
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
stuff I tried out, how I challenged myself, and how I cupped, and.
Because I think that's what the thing that most impressed me the most, again, coming back to that first time we met and you showed us those two profiles, and the fact that you were so decisive and clear about exactly what the flavor of each profile would deliver. I think that anyone that's getting ready to compete should be shaking in their boots right now, because Ante has his shit together and knows exactly what's going on in terms of just the ultimate example of what a roaster should be thinking and doing. Yeah.
We need Team Ante shirts, Anne.
We do. Seriously. No, Ante, like, in all honesty, like exactly what you just said, like it's just.
He's blushing. Can you see?
But no, you're the ultimate example of what a roaster should be doing and thinking. It's just.
But that's my
point. I would disagree with that. I'm just playing for a score sheet. So I've cut everything that's not extremely technical from my thought process. So
I understand. No, that's the thing. No, but you've got a full circle level of understanding, and that's just. Yeah, it's phenomenal.
That's my point, is that, like, is the roasting competition really highlighting what your capabilities are? Or is it just showing that you can adapt to exactly what the environment requires from you per the rules of this competition?
Bit of both?
It's a competition in a specialty coffee. You have to deliver the expected taste of a specialty coffee, which is gonna be reasonably developed, again on a lighter side, with all of those desirable specialty coffee flavors. If you look at a flavor wheel, that means no green coffee defects, which they shouldn't be, obviously, because otherwise it's not a specialty coffee.
Right.
And then you have those roasty notes that you should be avoiding. So you have a pretty clear idea what you need to deliver.
And you just hope the judges do as well.
Usually, my experience is they are very well calibrated.
Okay.
So 8 is going to be like it's going to be 8 on pretty much all of the score sheets. So
well,
there's no issue with that.
on that, why don't they calibrate? Sorry, why don't they calibrate with the competitors?
Because then you are on the same page with them. It's like training with someone who is going to be judging. It's not allowed. So if you are a judge and you're training me, you're not going to be allowed to judge in that competition.
No, but what I mean by that is, for example, like cultural palate is important, right? So Andrea Allen had a conversation with me where she had picked up the flavor. She explained these are the flavors that she was tasting, and she said strawberry in one of them. And they marked her down because the cultural palate on the panel didn't have strawberries as the same as what she interpreted strawberries, because somebody on the judging panel, I think their understanding of strawberries was very different to her understanding of strawberries.
It's like I think, have I told you the whole Australia versus how I had some Korean students in my class, and I had strawberry as a tasting note, and we were tasting strawberries to kind of calibrate, and I said, nah, Australian strawberries are terrible. They're really acidic, and they're pretty bad. Whereas like in Korea, oh my God, they're just like, they're beautiful. Yeah, intensely sweet and lush. And I'm just like, get me there now.
Right. But so, and this is what I'm saying. Like, if you had a calibration, and I mean, maybe I'm crazy for thinking this, but
yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah,
if you could at least calibrate the judges with the competitors just on what tastes like a strawberry and what tastes like a this and what tastes like a that. I mean, that's
like I was saying in the previous session, Ante, you need to sweet talk the judges and go, right, maybe we need to go to the brew bar and have a coffee so I can kind of see which coffees do you like to prefer, like do you prefer to taste or something, or I don't know.
But then again, it comes down to when you're describing your coffee. If it takes like a blueberry jam, maybe you shouldn't put it out because you're probably referring to a specific brand of a blueberry jam.
Yeah. Right.
Have a broader category. It's fruity, like, it's nutty. It's just
so use more ambiguous language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But I see the point in terms of. That would be kind of cool, because that would give you guys an insight straight away as to how they're tasting, and you'd be able to then pick your profile strategy pretty well heading into the comp then.
And no one's disadvantaged if everyone's getting the same calibration, right? Like if everyone's in the room together, it eliminates a level of ambiguity and gives everyone an even playing field. Just a thought. And you look like you're thinking intensely about this.
I did. I was about to say, so calibration with the judges, but then the competition doesn't happen, so now we're going to do it remotely. So we're just going to like rewrite the whole competition and just make it suit ourselves.
Here on the podcast first. And Are you excited, Ante?
But calibrating with the judges, the problem is they have a pretty big task calibrating amongst themselves. And then when you include 20, 30 people that are all strongly opinionated and want to win, that's looking like a complete mess.
You
tell them they can taste, but they can't talk.
Wouldn't you want to know what they're defining as overdeveloped and underdeveloped, though?
That could be, but that's easy. Serve 2 coffees, we can taste them. Overdeveloped, underdeveloped. There is no discussion. So you're going to tell me what you're going to consider as underdeveloped.
Cool.
And then I don't get any say in that.
No. We gag you. You can't talk, but you can taste, and that's it.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe
The
maybe
same,
that's where it
the
goes.
same the same can be maybe, like you said, offering a couple of different fruits to just to have a broad idea.
But that doesn't happen, does it? There's no calibration tasting with the competitors.
No, that's why I was
Ooh.
asking.
That's really interesting.
So
because that would be super important, wouldn't it?
Well, especially if it's being run in different countries around the world.
Yeah.
It's considered as a general knowledge, but then again, what I do here, I have some coffees that will probably fall on underdeveloped category over there,
Well,
and some
and that's
half of it is like gonna be overdeveloped.
And I would say it's actually the most failed exam in the queue as well, is roast ID.
Is it really?
Yeah, 100%. I think even more so than sensory. I think roast ID is right up there. Everyone will almost fail it because of exactly what Ante just said. He would have some products that would be considered undeveloped, even though technically for their purposes it's perfect, and vice versa kind of thing. So yeah.
I mean,
it's interesting.
There's so much ambiguity because we don't have any standards around this stuff, right? Like,
but how do you standardize something that's so subjective? It's I think it's the best attempt so far. Can it be improved? Yes. Will it be improved? It will in the future. We have what we have, and it's just about
we're on the way there.
Working on it, yeah.
Before we go, anybody who just listened to this, there is 2 reasons to watch this video. First of all is because of the roast curves that we discussed. And second of all...
And thank you for sharing those, Ante.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah.
The second reason is, and don't worry about what I'm about to tell you, but your pen was like a puppet throughout this. And so... So the closer you brought it, it looked like a puppet that was having a conversation with us. And it is worth watching. Absolutely. It's why I didn't say anything through the whole conversation, and I didn't send you any text to say,
oh no,
hey, by the way,
sorry.
it's great. No, it's fantastic.
Stop waving your pen.
No, it's fantastic. It has a life of its own. It's purple and pink, and it is absolutely worth watching this conversation just to see the roast curves and to see the pen puppet that participated in this conversation as a mute. Ante Bikic,
yes.
We cannot wait to wear the T-shirts that say that you were the world roasting champion.
Hell yes.
We are definitely Team Ante on this, even though whoever's competing from our country is going to hate us.
No, they'll be right.
Who is competing from Australia?
Don't know. They just started the competition now, so they're doing preliminary entries, I believe, at the moment, and then they pick, I think, the finalists from that preliminary entry.
What happened with the last winners? Not of the Worlds, I mean the national champions. So they didn't get to compete at a Worlds last year. So what happened?
They actually stopped the roasting competition before anything went ahead. So they didn't get a chance to actually run it. So I think the people that had a chance to enter were still able to go into this year, but I think they opened up a few extra spots or something. For entry into that or something. Yeah. Okay.
Do we know what they did for the baristas? So we had like a full year's worth of barista champions, national champions that didn't end up competing at Worlds.
Don't know.
No
idea.
We don't care about them for this conversation anyway, so it doesn't matter. We just
roasters rule.
Clearly.
I mean, barista is a roasters championship, isn't it? I mean, half of them are at least
look at
roasters.
The controversial.
Isn't that right?
Wow.
True.
Well, I wonder if the baristas would have to say something about that. Perhaps, given that they have to prepare and vomit 50 times before they go on stage as they present all of your coffees. Oh, what a controversial spot to end a fabulous 2-hour conversation. Thank you, guys. This was awesome. Ante, good luck. We wish you every success with this. And, we look forward to hearing what's going to come from that. And Anne Cooper, as fabulous as always. Thank you for co-hosting this conversation and driving. And I
Thank you.
apologize to everybody for my rookie questions. It's just fun to ask rookie questions.
No question is a rookie question.
I'm happy to take the shot as the person who looks like an idiot to ask these questions, because other people are thinking them. So
absolutely.
Let's do this again sometime. This was really fun. Awesome.
Definitely.
Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. And thanks to our episode sponsor, Baratza.